In our lesson today, we studied 2 Samuel chapter 7, and we learned that God's promises are gracious and unchanging. We also learned about the covenant that God made with David to establish David's dynasty forever. So in today's activity, we are going to learn about some other covenants or promises that God has made with his people. So remember in our lesson, I briefly mentioned the story of Noah's Ark, and when God made a covenant or a promise with his people never to flood the earth again, what was the symbol that he used to show that? It was a rainbow. So a rainbow is going to be the basis of our craft today. So your first step is you're going to make a rainbow. And there's a ton of different ways you can do this depending on the materials that you have. I'll show you some examples here, but kids, if you ask your parents, if you just go online and do a quick Google search of rainbow craft, it will give you a ton of different ideas for you that you could use. Something I did was I just printed off a coloring sheet that I found online, and then I had my daughter use Q-tips and paint to fill in each section of the rainbow. If you don't have paint, you could do a coloring sheet, but just color it with marker or crayon or whatever you have. You could make a rainbow like this. The top part is a paper plate that I painted, and the bottom is long pieces of tissue paper. If you have chalk, you can go outside in your driveway or sidewalk and draw a big rainbow out there. But step one is to make your rainbow. So once you have your rainbow, in each section, we're going to write an example of a covenant or a promise that God has made with his people. For my example, I'm going to use the coloring sheet with crayon that I did. So in the red section, I wrote a covenant that we learned about today, which was from 2 Samuel chapter 16. And the covenant that God made with his people was that David's dynasty would last forever. And then down to the orange section, I thought of a different covenant that God had made with his people. This one again we talked about briefly from Noah's Ark, from Genesis 9:13. The covenant that God made was never to flood the earth again. And then down to the yellow section, I went to John chapter 14 verse 2, and the covenant that God made with his people was that Jesus will prepare a place for us in heaven. And then down to the green section, I found another example of a covenant from John chapter 14 verse 14, which was that if we ask anything in Jesus' name, he will give that to us. And finally, 2 Samuel chapter 9, another covenant that we learned about today was that God promised to give David a great name. And as for the last section, I left it blank because I want to challenge you and encourage you, perhaps along with your family, to find another example of a covenant that God has made with his people. And what an amazing and wonderful thing to know that any of these covenants or promises that God has made to us, they are gracious and unchanging. And anything that you have written in your rainbow can never be changed no matter what. How amazing is that? So I hope you have fun with this. Again, I would love to see some examples of the crafts that you've been creating at home once we're finally able to get back to church. But I hope you have a great week, and we'll see you again soon. Bye.